The birth of a monster. The genesis of corporate power. Imagine a world where a private company doesn't just sell products, but owns the law itself. A world where a corporate logo carries more weight than the seal of a king. In the modern era, we look at giants like Apple, Amazon, or Saudi Aramco and think we are seeing the peak of human wealth. But we are wrong. To find the true titan of history, we must travel back to the year 1602, to the rain-slicked docks of Amsterdam. Here, a monster was born, the Verenigd Oost-Indische Compagnie, better known as the VOC. At its absolute zenith, this single entity was valued at $7.9 trillion in today's currency. That is more than the GDP of modern-day Japan and Germany combined. It wasn't just a business, it was a sovereign state masquerading as a company. The VOC was granted a 21-year monopoly by the Dutch government to carry out trade activities in Asia. But trade is a polite word for what they actually did. The VOC was the first company in history to be given the power to wage war, to build fortresses, to mint its own currency, and to execute criminals. It had its own army of 40,000 soldiers and a private navy of 150 heavily armed merchant ships. This was the birth of the Mega-Corp, a private superpower that operated outside the boundaries of morality. Welcome back to Untold Past. Today, we are deconstructing the most successful, most brutal, and most profitable financial machine ever constructed by human hands. This is not a story of exploration. It is a story of how capital became a weapon. We are diving into the ledger of the VOC to see how they turned spices into blood and blood into the greatest fortune the world has ever seen. Before we unlock the vault, make sure you are subscribed. You are watching the financial autopsy of an empire. Part 2. The invention of the stock market, the alchemy of risk. Before the VOC, maritime trade was a gambler's game. A merchant would buy a ship, fill it with goods, and pray it didn't sink. If the ship went down, the merchant was ruined. It was high risk, high reward, but it was unsustainable for global domination. The VOC solved this with a stroke of genius that changed the world forever: the Joint Stock Company. In 1602, the VOC invited the citizens of the Netherlands to invest in their voyages. For the first time in history, a common baker or a blacksmith could own a share of a global enterprise. They created a permanent capital base, meaning the company didn't dissolve after one voyage, it lived on, voyage after voyage, growing like a living organism. To facilitate the trading of these shares, they established the Amsterdam Stock Exchange, the world's first formal stock market. This was the alchemy of risk. By spreading the danger across thousands of investors, the VOC became invincible to individual losses. If one ship sank, the company barely felt it, but the upside was astronomical. The VOC began paying out dividends of up to 40% annually for nearly 200 years. This massive influx of capital allowed them to build ships faster than any rival. They didn't just compete with other merchants, they outspent them, outbuilt them, and eventually outkilled them. The stock market wasn't just a way to raise money, it was a way to bind the entire population to the company's success. When everyone is an investor, no one asks questions about how the profit is made. This was the ultimate financial shield. While the investors in Amsterdam grew rich on their dividends, the company used that money to fund a military expansion that would make Caesar blush. They turned the ocean into a private highway and the stock market into an engine of conquest. The nutmeg monopoly, the price of a spice. To understand why the VOC was so rich, you have to understand the value of a single seed, the nutmeg. In the 17th century, nutmeg was the ultimate status symbol in Europe.
It was believed to cure the plague, and it was so rare that it grew in only one place on Earth, the tiny volcanic Banda Islands in modern-day Indonesia. The VOC didn't want to just buy nutmeg, they wanted to own it, every single grain of it. In 1621, Jan Pieterszoon Koon, the ruthless governor-general of the VOC, arrived at the Banda Islands with a fleet and a message. He demanded a total monopoly. When the local Bandanese leaders refused, citing their right to trade with anyone, Koon didn't negotiate. He initiated a systematic campaign of genocide. VOC mercenaries and Japanese ronin hired by the company swept through the islands. Out of a population of 15,000 people, it is estimated that only 1,000 survived. The rest were killed, starved, or sold into slavery. Koon then replaced the native population with VOC-controlled slave labor to work the nutmeg plantations. This was the corporate massacre. This brutal efficiency gave the VOC a 100% monopoly on nutmeg and mace. They could now set the price at whatever they wanted. They would often burn their own warehouses full of spices just to keep the supply low and the prices high. This wasn't free market capitalism, this was forced market capitalism. The blood of the Bandanese people was the hidden ingredient in every spiced dish in Europe. The VOC had proven that with enough cannons, you can turn a small island into a gold mine and a massacre into a profitable fiscal quarter.
The nutmeg monopoly, the price of a spice. To understand why the VOC was so rich, you have to understand the value of a single seed, the nutmeg. In the 17th century, nutmeg was the ultimate status symbol in Europe. It was believed to cure the plague, and it was so rare that it grew in only one place on Earth, the tiny volcanic Banda Islands in modern-day Indonesia. The VOC didn't want to just buy nutmeg, they wanted to own it, every single grain of it. In 1621, Jan Pieterszoon Koon, the ruthless governor-general of the VOC, arrived at the Banda Islands with a fleet and a message. He demanded a total monopoly. When the local Bandanese leaders refused, citing their right to trade with anyone, Koon didn't negotiate. He initiated a systematic campaign of genocide. VOC mercenaries and Japanese ronin hired by the company swept through the islands. Out of a population of 15,000 people, it is estimated that only 1,000 survived. The rest were killed, starved, or sold into slavery. Koon then replaced the native population with VOC-controlled slave labor to work the nutmeg plantations. This was the corporate massacre. This brutal efficiency gave the VOC a 100% monopoly on nutmeg and mace. They could now set the price at whatever they wanted. They would often burn their own warehouses full of spices just to keep the supply low and the prices high. This wasn't free market capitalism, this was forced market capitalism. The blood of the Bandanese people was the hidden ingredient in every spiced dish in Europe. The VOC had proven that with enough cannons, you can turn a small island into a gold mine and a massacre into a profitable fiscal quarter. The private superpower, a state within a state. By the mid-1600s, the VOC had transcended the definition of a company. It had become a private superpower. In Asia, they didn't ask for permission, they took territory. They captured the city of Jakarta, burned it to the ground, and built the Dutch-style fortress city called Batavia on the ashes. This became the headquarters of their shadow empire. The VOC operated with sovereign immunity. They signed treaties with local sultans at the tip of a sword. If a king refused to trade, the VOC navy would blockade their ports until the population starved. They were the first truly transnational corporation, moving goods between Japan, China, India, and Africa without ever touching European soil. They traded Japanese silver for Chinese silk, then traded that silk for Indian cotton, and used the cotton to buy spices in Indonesia. They were so powerful that they influenced the politics of entire continents. In Japan, they were the only Europeans allowed to stay during the isolationist shogunate, simply because they convinced the shogun they cared about nothing but profit, not religion, not politics, just the bottom line. This focus on profit above all made them the most efficient machine in history. Their internal bureaucracy was a maze of secrecy. The Heren 17, the 17 directors in Amsterdam, controlled the fate of millions of people thousands of miles away. They managed a supply chain that spanned half the globe in an era when it took 6 months for a letter to reach its destination. They were the architects of the modern global economy, creating the routes, the ports, and the banking systems we still use today. But they were also a warning. What happens when a corporation grows more powerful than the governments that created it?
The corruption and the great crash, the death of a titan. For 200 years, the VOC was too big to fail, but the rot started from the inside. By the late 18th century, the company was hollowed out by the very greed that created it. Corruption among VOC officials became legendary. Employees were underpaid, so they began running their own private shadow trade businesses on the side, stealing from the company's profits. The acronym VOC was jokingly said to stand for Vergaan onder Corruptie, perished under corruption. The company's overhead was also becoming unsustainable. Maintaining a private army and a global network of fortresses was draining the treasury. To keep the stock price high and the investors happy, the VOC continued to pay out massive dividends even when they were losing money. They were essentially running a 200-year-long Ponzi scheme, borrowing money to pay shareholders. Then came the external shocks. The rise of the British East India Company and the Fourth Anglo-Dutch War dealt a fatal blow. The VOC's trade routes were cut off, and their debts became a mountain. In 1799, the unthinkable happened. The richest company in human history was declared bankrupt. The Dutch government was forced to step in and take over its debts and territories. The VOC didn't just die, it collapsed under its own weight. It left behind a legacy of innovation and horror. It gave us the stock market, global logistics, and corporate law, but it also left behind colonized nations and a history of exploitation. The VOC is the ultimate case study in the financial historian playbook. It shows that when a company's only goal is the growth of the share price, it will eventually consume itself.
The modern legacy, the shadow of the VOC. As we look at the world today, the ghost of the VOC is everywhere. Every time you check a stock ticker, every time a multinational corporation lobbies a government, and every time a trade war breaks out over a vital resource like semiconductors or oil, you are seeing the DNA of the VOC. They were the pioneers of the corporate personhood, the idea that a company can exist as an entity with its own rights, separate from its owners. They proved that the pursuit of profit is the most powerful force in human history, capable of moving mountains and erasing civilizations. But they also left us with a haunting question. How do we control a monster that we built to be unstoppable? Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the ledgers of the VOC here on Untold Past. If you found this journey through corporate history valuable, make sure to hit the like button and share this video with someone who thinks modern companies are powerful. We've only just scratched the surface of the secrets hidden in the past. What should we investigate next? The South Sea Bubble? The rise of the Rothschilds? Let us know in the comments. Stay curious, and remember, history is written in ink, but it's funded in gold.